It's time to chat it up with one of the best in the business, baby. Boy Green Daily starts right now.
I'm going to lose my gosh darn bananas. Boy Green Daily starts now. Zoinks!
I made it clear that my intention was to play, and my intention was to play for the New York Jets.
You're fucking depression.
That fires me up every time, baby. Paul Eston Jr., a.k.a. Boy Green. I'm the New York Jets digital reporter for Heavy.com. Let's go immediately to our special guest who's gracing us with her presence. An icon, a legend, and she's one of the best. I just love her in our first time coming on the show, so let's bring in Judy Battista. Wow, Judy!
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Of course. Well, Judy, it's great to have you on the show, and of course, we had what was that now? Just a little over or a little less than a week ago, I suppose, with Back Together Weekend, the NFL Network, and you and Baldy and everybody there. That was awesome, and you'll be back coming up this weekend as well for some more New York Jets coverage, Judy. So phenomenal.
Thank you. It's like being back on the beat, which that was a long time ago, but it's always nice to be out there.
Yeah, so let's dive into it. Part of your journey, your trip on Back Together Weekend with the New York Jets included a sit-down interview with yourself and Brian Baldinger and Aaron Rodgers there at the Jets facilities. I'm curious, because I saw when you were doing the interview, you had that notebook on your lap. What was the number one thing that you wanted to ask or investigate or explore with Aaron Rodgers during your conversation?
There were two things. The first was obviously you want to know how he feels and where he thinks he is, because he had said in an early interview that there were some things he needed to do on the field to sort of feel like he was getting towards 100%. So I wanted to know where he was on that and what those things were. So that was number one. And then the second thing was, again, he had said in an earlier interview that he had always wanted to give the Jets like 2 good years, or the chance to win 2 Super Bowls with the Jets. Obviously last year was not a good year, but it was a year. So the question was, well, does last year count part of the 2 years? And so I wanted to get him to answer that question. And he said, like, no, last year was a bad year. So we've got 2 years still to go. So this year and next year, presumably. So those were the two like sort of newsy things you wanted to get. But otherwise, you just, I mean, you know, you get to talk to the starting quarterback usually once a week in the NFL. And you get to really sit down with one like Aaron Rodgers in preseason. You know, you want to ask, you don't know when you're going to do this again. So you want to ask everything that you possibly can, like not just how you're feeling physically, but what do you think about the team? Like, how's Garrett Wilson? All those kinds of questions. But those were the ones that I had in my head that I wanted to get to.
Judy, I'm kind of curious here as an interviewer, and it's fascinating for me. And it's got to be weird. You're on the other side of the interview here, but I'm kind of curious for prep's sake, how much of it is your preparation of questions that, again, to your point, that I need to know these two things. These are two pressing, newsy things I want to ask, and also the flow of an interview. That Aaron Rodgers going to say something like, I'm sorry, what did you just say? And then the follow-up nature. So what is that balance as you're setting up for interviews?
Yeah, well, you know, you're going to start the interview however you want to start the interview.
Sure.
But obviously, I mean, I think that was pretty obvious that the first thing has to be like, how are you feeling? I mean,
you have to.
You know, I mean, we haven't seen you on a field in a year. How you doing? So that, and then, you know, and then I think you're right. It just sort of flows from there. And he was very generous with his time, like he was not rushed. And he, you know, he is a great interview. Like, he is a great talker, because you get the sense that he's actually thinking about your question, and he's actually thinking, like, he does not just sort of spit out cliches. He actually thinks about the question and thinks about what his answer is. So again, you just want to keep talking to him as much as you can, but it just sort of naturally flowed. I mean, you know, we asked how he was feeling, and then how's the team look, and, you know, how are you feeling about the season? And then Baldy and I, you know, obviously we talked before the interview about what we each wanted to get to and how we wanted to finish it. And I said at the end, I want to ask him, like, you said 2 years. So is this the 2 years or what? And Baldy said he wanted to ask him, like, you know, what would be your message to Jets fans, right? Jets fans have suffered a long time. What's your message? And so we both, you know, that's how we sort of wrapped up that interview. And then Aaron sort of took it himself and said, Jordan Love had just signed the contract the night before. And so he sort of said like, hey, don't spend it all in one place, but my house is on the market. So, which was great. So you sort of plot it out, but you definitely go where the interview is going to.
Yeah, there was a hilarious comment. So we will see some updates. I saw because, of course, NFL Network is on the road. They're going to a lot of camps. I heard Jordan Love's response about trying to work a deal with Rodgers if he is apparently to buy the house. So it's great back and forth that we're seeing there. And Judy, as you were there at Jets training camp, what did your eyes tell you? Because what kind of Aaron Rodgers are we getting? I've asked players in the locker room. I've asked media people all throughout this offseason to try to get a sense of what it is. And if I could boil it down to one thing, it's shoulder shrug. Players, I don't know. Well, you'll see when I see. I have no idea. What did you see when you were there at Jets camp from Aaron Rodgers?
So we were there Saturday, and he looked good. He was sharp at that point. Now, keep in mind, no pads at that point.
Of course,
and I know they've sort of looked a little shaky in the last few days, although yesterday he was extremely sharp.
Yes.
But he looked, look, what I was looking for, I think what we're all looking at is he moving well? Like, does he look comfortable? And he did. Like, he was moving normally. There was one play when we were there where the pressure came and he had to sort of, move out of the pocket, and he hit Alan Lazard on a 20-yard pass to the right sideline. And it was normal Aaron Rodgers, right? Like, if you didn't know something had happened to his Achilles, you would not have known from watching that. But again, there are no pads on. Like, the pressure broke down, but it's not like Quinnen Williams was actually going to sack Aaron Rodgers. So it's not like, we still haven't seen him have to put his foot in the ground and really take off. And that was the question I wanted to ask him about, what does he need to do to feel like he's all the way back? And he said, there was that play that I just described where he had to get out. That was important to him because he realized he went to the sideline and realized he was not thinking at that moment, how's my knee going to respond? How will my leg feel? Can I still do this? It's been a really long time since I did this. Am I still able to do it? So I think physically he looks normal. I think the only last bit is mentally that he has to be convinced that he's normal and can do everything that he's always been able to do. And I think he's almost there on that as well.
And to your point, we kind of have been dancing around the thought that the last time Aaron Rodgers was on a field was September 11th of 2023. And if he were to step on the field the next time, September 9th, Monday Night Football, it'd be almost a year to the date since he played, which feeds kind of into the preseason question that's been getting kicked around this week. Head coach Robert Saleh was asked about it. Said definitely not the first two games, so that wasn't much of a surprise. But maybe the Giants game we'll see, which last year got two drives. Do you have a take one way or the other, whether they should play him for the two drives or just, hey, we'll see him Monday Night Football, and the first time we're going to see real action, which is kind of crazy to think about, is from 2023 to 2024 in September?
Well, I think the element in here, the X factor in here is that they have 3 joint practices set up, right? And of course, now I'm blanking on what teams they are. I know it's the Giants, and I can't remember.
Carolina and Washington.
Right. And so, as you know, in the NFL in the last few years, joint practices are sort of taking the place of preseason games because coaches can coordinate them. There's a little bit more control over them. Coaches are able to work on what they want to work on without being afraid that some guy who is trying to make the roster is going to go try to take Aaron Rodgers' head off.
Right.
And so I wonder if we are going to see Aaron Rodgers participating a lot in those and not so much in the preseason games, which, even under normal circumstances, you're just not seeing starting quarterbacks take part in this. Now, I just read somewhere, I think that Joe Burrow is going to, because obviously his season ended prematurely with injury. But I don't know how many joint practices the Bengals are doing. I mean, the Jets had that sort of safety net of having a lot of joint practices. So if they are reluctant to put Rodgers on the field for the preseason game, they do have those practices, which if you've been to one, there's certainly a greater intensity in joint practices than there is in a normal training camp practice, right? They're finally facing some kind of opponent, even if it's in a controlled environment. So I would not be surprised to see him doing a lot of work in those.
Is there a right, or is there to be said, our first take, oh, what a terrible decision, or, oh, what a great decision, or is it just there is no right or wrong, it just is?
Right. I think it just is. And I think it's just, what does he feel comfortable? I mean, listen, Aaron is a 40-year-old future first ballot Hall of Famer. So I would think that Robert Saleh will probably defer a great deal to how he feels and what he feels he needs to do. Again, I think physically he's there. I think the only question that, that might still be lingering for Aaron is, are there still plays that he has not performed on a field that, that he has to be sure he can still do. And so I think if you get to, right before the third preseason game and he says, listen, I just want to get out there in live action, I could see Robert Saleh maybe, letting him do that. I think obviously you defer an awful lot to what Aaron Rodgers wants to do.
And Judy, again, we're speaking with Judy Battista, baby. She's one of the best. It's so phenomenal to have her here on the program. Again, she was with Brian Baldinger at, Back Together weekend, which is terrific. It's a national holiday, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of the football coming back, which is terrific. And I'm curious, with this New York Jets team, as we're getting ready for things, and you see Aaron Rodgers, and we're getting ready for all of this that is coming together here for the New York Jets, Judy, where I kind of wanted to go here ultimately is with this joint practices. How do you feel about them? I've heard other Jets analysts kind of in our community that cover the Jets exclusively have kind of like poo-pooed the joint practice thing because of the intensity and the risk that is potentially involved with a team. Because there's some teams like the Jets that are going full bore. They're doing 3 of them. The LA Rams are another team. They're doing 4 of them, which is more than any team that are coming. But some teams aren't necessarily playing completely in those waters as much as other teams. Is there any concern to you from a joint practice perspective from the actual intensity that comes up? And to your point, a player just going, there's 90-man rosters here. Player 89 of the Commanders says, oh, I'm going to make my story. Aaron Rodgers, you're about to get the business here. You know what I mean?
Right. And I think that is what is avoidable in joint practices that you run the risk of in the preseason games, because joint practices are, they're coordinated with the two coaches coordinate about, like, this is what I want to work on. This is what I want to do. This is, how we're going to approach this. And so there is some degree of control there, but there's also hitting, which is important. Like, you hear players say this all the time. And I mean, they know better than anybody else. Like, you can't have a summer with no hitting.
Right.
And then you jump into week 1 and, you're supposed to go full steam ahead, and just, pound each other. Like, that's just not realistic. They have to be built up to that too. So I think that we're seeing most coaches and players preferring the joint practices because, again, there's a measure of control, but you're still getting the sort of physical activity and you can work on specific things. And certainly as we hear conversation that the off-season schedule is going to be changed and maybe they're going to take away another preseason game, I think you're going to see even more joint practices because that will be the opportunity to work on stuff.
And Judy, you and Brian Baldinger were apparently ahead of the conversation on this Garrett Wilson, Aaron Rodgers thing, because during your guys' full sit down, you talked about it, and Aaron Rodgers talked about how it's hard to throw to Garrett because you're just so fast. There's all these intricacies, and I love the breakdown. You guys should watch the full interview. You can find it online. It's a 11, 12-minute plus interview that you can find out there. And boy, it was fascinating. And then to see what has happened since that interview took place and the viral videos of Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson being very fiery, passionate, animated, the word you'd like to use for that. And it's gone kind of crazy. And we've since heard from both Rodgers and Garrett who have downplayed it a little bit. But I found Rodgers' conversation with you and Brian incredibly insightful of the why and the explanation of that. And again, you guys kind of kicked off, I guess, with that conversation.
Yeah. So the viral videos, and I understand why they go viral, and I understand particularly why they go viral among fans who don't watch practice all year, obviously can't see these practices. So it looks one way. For those of us who are at practices all year and you're watching, that's not unusual. It doesn't, these are highly, intensely competitive people, and they are fiery, but toward the same end. And particularly in the case of Aaron and Garrett Wilson, Aaron thinks the world of Garrett Wilson. And part of what he is doing is trying to get Garrett Wilson to come up another level because he thinks Garrett Wilson has the skills, has the ability to be the best receiver in the league. I mean, he has talked about him like Devontae Adams, who Aaron Rodgers thinks is the best receiver in the league. And so he thinks he's got the skill set, but he was talking, as you said, in the interview that Baldy and I did with him, he was talking about like he needs to practice that way, right? Like he's like Aaron Rodgers is sort of pushing Garrett to get to that, right? He wants him to raise his level. And so that's why you're seeing the fiery stuff. But like, I mean, I certainly don't think there's any problem between the two of them. On the contrary, I think they are very much alike. They're very emotional and very passionate and intensely competitive and want to win. And I don't know if fans remember this, but last year when the offense was dysfunctional, there were games after which I went over and talked to Garrett Wilson, and he looked so frustrated. I thought he was going to start to cry. Like he just was so frustrated and upset. And he, very much to his credit, never said a bad word about any quarterback, never said a bad word about coaching, nothing. He was a great teammate. But you could just, I mean, he was so upset and so frustrated that this is just what you're seeing right now this summer is sort of the flip side of that frustration, right? He is so ready to go. And, you know, Rodgers is pushing him to raise his level. That's what you're seeing. So I think this is all good. Like those sort of like where they're yelling at each other and Rodgers is, you can see he's gesturing, like telling him how he wants something run or, you know, what side he wants him turning to. I mean, that's how you get stuff done. That's the connection you want going into the season.
But there certainly has been an evolution. Garrett Wilson, his rookie year, he couldn't quite contain himself from a maturity standpoint the same way. They go after the game, the media comes over to him, and he's like, geez, like we sucked on offense. They're like, whoa, okay, he is just...
Which Rodgers talked about in that interview, right? Rodgers said, like, you want to harness it. You don't want to get rid of the passion, obviously, but you don't want somebody flying off the handle, right? You've got to harness that energy and the passion to sort of raise your level on the field, which I agree with you. I think we've sort of seen that as part of the maturation of Garrett Wilson was last year. I mean, he must have been biting his tongue like crazy because he really never broke ranks and never said any of the stuff that most of us would have said.
Yeah, and the wide receiver market is exploding. We're seeing people get paid left and right. But the complicating nature for me as I look at Garrett Wilson is where does he stand in the receivers of the league? Because he hasn't put up the elite numbers, but part of that, everyone could point to the quarterback play, obviously.
Right. I mean, he's had 2,000-yard seasons, which I know is not right. It's not just Justin Jefferson.
Sure, right.
But he was doing that with arguably the worst quarterback situation in the league. I mean, last year in particular, he has not played with an elite quarterback. And, I mean, Justin Jefferson had Kirk Cousins.
Jamar Chase had Joe Burrow. Right.
Jamar Chase has Joe Burrow, who he has played with for years. So their connection, it was built in. I think to be fair to Garrett Wilson, to me, the fact that he hit 1,000 yards both of the years under the circumstances that he was playing, that's amazing, which only makes you think like, what's he going to do if Aaron Rodgers plays all year, right? And he's the number one receiver for Aaron Rodgers. You really sort of think, especially because the Jets tried to get more receivers to try to take some of the, the pressure off him and to take some of the defensive attention off him. We'll see when Mike Williams gets on the field.
Of course.
But certainly, I look forward to seeing what Garrett Wilson is going to do, with a healthy Aaron Rodgers out there.
And I wonder, when you go to the negotiating table, let's say he has a spectacular year that a lot of people believe he will with Aaron Rodgers, and I agree. But, when he gets a negotiating table and the Jets look at the numbers, because that's what they're going to do, and see the production and be like, long story short, it's how much should he be paid? Because he hasn't been in the CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Dak Prescott for CeeDee Lamb, but that same conversation of great quarterback play that have put up those numbers, and he hasn't put up those numbers. Would the Jets say, well, he has played with terrible quarterback? Will that even factor in? It just seems complicated because Sauce seems unquestionably, or questionably to some, the best corner in football. That contract seems easy. Okay, who's the highest paid? Okay, Sauce, a penny more. Makes sense. Boom. It's not as easy to say that about Garrett because of the lack of numbers, which, again, it seems interesting when that contract discussion begins, which, according to the CBA, can begin next offseason. Right. I'm curious how that plays because of Garrett Wilson's lack of having a great quarterback up until hopefully this season.
Right. Well, obviously this season will be very telling.
Yeah.
But the flip side is going to be he's a homegrown talent, a guy you drafted. If you let him go, if you don't give him the big contract, and the markets are And the market has exploded. There's no
Yes.
question. But I mean, that's where the market is.
Of course.
So, you can't say like, well, you didn't have the production in your first 2 years. Okay. So let him go. Let him hit free agency and see what happens. And then where are you? Because by that time, you may not have Aaron Rodgers by the time he would hit free agency. You don't have Aaron Rodgers. You also don't have a number one receiver. What are you doing with your team? So it would be very bad if the Jets let Garrett Wilson walk out the door, especially because he is a homegrown guy. And I mean, very bad.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think they want to pay him. I'm just going to be curious at where the Jets' number may be and where Garrett's number may be
Don't
different.
Forget, just remember, the salary cap is going to continue to go up a lot. So yes, these contract numbers are like wild, but the money is there. They got the money. So, they're going to have to figure it out. And of course, they're going to have to figure out who their next quarterback is. Like, that's the next question, right? Who's the next quarterback for the Jets? Because if you have Aaron for 2 years, you've got to start the succession planning. You see teams doing it already. Yeah. So you're going to have to factor that
in. No doubt about it. And I'm curious, how much better do you believe this Jets roster is this year, right now, in this current moment in time, compared to a year ago?
Significantly better. First of all, the offensive line was overhauled, and yes, it's older, and so that makes you concerned about injuries, but it's better. It's more experienced. It's more mature. And, last year was obviously a debacle, including for the offensive line. But a lot of those young guys got a lot of experience last year. And so now you've got some depth that has experience. But the front line offensive line is much better. Breece Hall is healthy right out of the gate, which is no small thing. Now, he played last year, but he was coming quickly off an injury. So he's completely healthy now, which is awesome. Again, Mike Williams, whenever he gets on the field, should help relieve a little of the attention that will be on Garrett Wilson. Malachi Corley, the Yak King, I love that. He is a big addition. So I feel like they've got more weapons there. They've obviously got better protection. You just can't say it enough times. It all hinges on Aaron's health. Right? If Aaron is healthy and playing all season, this should be a playoff team. No question about it. But he has to be healthy. And I think the defense will be fine. And I think eventually Hassan Reddick, they will figure something out and he will get in there. But the defense is really good. And imagine how good that defense would be if they could actually play with a lead. Aaron in that interview said something like a 2-score lead. We'd like to be able to give him a 2-score lead. I'm like, a 2-score lead? Like, they would take any lead, like they held the team in the games last year. So playing with a 2-score lead, I can't even imagine what that would be like for that defense. So I think the team is considerably better than it was last year, but everything is fragile in the NFL and it all hinges on one person.
In your same breath with Garrett, like, oh my goodness, how the hell did this guy get 1,000 yards of back-to-back season to play with 7 different quarterbacks, which is an unbelievable stat that is unfortunately true. You say the same thing about the defense. It's been top 5 each the last 2 years. You look at the other side of the ball. How the hell is this team top 5 in both of these? And just, again, to your point, scores, scoring, having leads, having Aaron Rodgers on the other side. Who knows?
When Aaron said in that interview, we'd like to give them a 2-score lead, I literally in my head was thinking, man, a 2-score lead. Did they even? I'm trying to think in my head, did they ever have a 2-score lead last year?
I don't think so.
I don't know. I'm looking forward to that scenario playing out, hopefully.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of Jet fans are as well. And I go here. You mentioned the playoffs for the New York Jets. I go to Judy Battista, wrote a column. I got my little notebook here, my NFL media notebook. Hey, see, we're on brand here. I'm a company man, even though I don't work for the company. Maybe one day we'll see what happens. But I see in here you had some predictions at the end of May, and in here you had the Jets making the playoffs. Oh, that sounds phenomenal. Great prediction. But you said to make so let me rephrase it. You said you had them making the playoffs but losing the divisional, which is kind of a Debbie Downer. But hey, make the playoffs hasn't happened in a long time. That would be exciting. And you have this line in your answer that I loved here. Could the Jets make a run to the Super Bowl? Yes. But, and then there's some explanation that some breaks would have to occur with, there's elite teams in the AFC and things of that nature. I go to you there. You think this Jets team can make a Super Bowl run, Judy Battista?
I do think they can. Again, things will have to break their way. They're going to have good health, obviously.
Yes.
And things are going to happen to other AFC teams because the AFC is top heavy, right? There are some truly elite. Obviously, the Kansas City Chiefs are just in another stratosphere.
Yeah.
But if Joe Burrow is healthy, the Bengals are have been a Super Bowl team. So if he's healthy, you've got to assume that while they've got Jamar Chase and T. Higgins still in the fold, they are a contender. The Ravens are clearly a Super Bowl contender. And then you don't know who else is going to bubble up. Buffalo is going through a transition and has sort of remade the receiver room. But I mean, Josh Allen makes them a playoff team pretty much all the time.
Sure.
Miami and Tua. So, I mean, there are other teams in the mix. If the AFC is top heavy, and we saw it last year, there's just a lot of really good teams in the AFC and a lot of really elite quarterbacks. But the Jets have one of those elite quarterbacks, and they're a good team. So I think they are a playoff team. And then I think you just have to see how the matchup goes. Like, who do they get in? Who do they get in the first round? Who would they get in the second round? And and how does it break? I mean, other teams have injuries too, just the way it happened to the Jets. So you just sort of have to see how this season breaks down. But I certainly think it would be a tremendous disappointment if they don't make the playoffs this year if Rodgers is healthy.
Oh, yeah, an absolute disaster if that were to be the case.
I mean, if he plays the entire season and they miss the playoffs, yikes.
Yeah, I'd like to know how in the hell that happened if that is indeed the case. That would be
very bad.
You mentioned the playoff drought, which is embarrassing. The Jets have not been to the playoffs since the season of 2010 and the year 2011. But a more embarrassing drought than that is the Jets have not won the division since 2002. I'm curious, with Buffalo kind of reshaping, of course, they have Josh Allen. Miami, they lost a lot of defensive players, but they signed their guy Tua, and of course, the offense is spectacular. I'm curious, what is your sense? Do the Jets have a path to winning the AFC East legitimately in your mind, and what's kind of your sense of this division as we head into 2024?
I do think they have a chance to win the division, certainly, for the reasons you just mentioned. Look, New England the reason nobody wins that division since 2002 or whatever it is Tom Brady, right? And then Josh Allen. Okay, I mean, what are you going to do? You have the all-time greatest, and then you had like a super phenom come in. So
crap luck. Yeah.
Right. So yes, they can win the division would be the short answer. I agree with you that Buffalo has retooled an awful lot. I don't necessarily think that means they're taking a step back and rebuilding, but you presumably it's going to take a little bit of time for that wide receiver room to get into the flow with Josh Allen. They've lost some veteran talent. And so, you got to see how it sort of comes together leadership wise. But Josh Allen is the kind of quarterback who elevates people around him and gives you a chance to win every game. Miami, as you pointed out, lost a lot, but they do have Tua and Tyreek Hill. The key for them is, do you think they can win a game in cold weather if they have to? And last year we saw when Tyreek Hill got hurt and was like the whole thing fell apart, right? The offense just came all the way down.
Yeah.
So they really need their critical players to be in good health all the way down the stretch. And they probably need to have home playoff games because they are just, or at least have not been in the past, they are just not built to, play in Buffalo in late January, or, if they had to go to Kansas City, could they play in late January? So you don't worry about that so much with the Jets because you have a quarterback who has played a lot of those horrible weather games and did pretty well in them. And they can run the ball with Brees Hall if they have to. So I do think the Jets can win the division. No question about it.
And again, Miami has no one to blame but themselves. They played Buffalo essentially in a playoff game at the end of the year at home. They win. They run it back with Buffalo in the same place. They lose. They go to negative quadruple billion degrees in Kansas City, and they had that for themselves. So they blew it there at the end, which is interesting. But my final one, Judy, before we get you out of here, you've mentioned that the key piece to this puzzle, the Lincoln log that's in this place before you yank it out and potentially Jenga and the whole thing falls apart, is Aaron Rodgers' health. I ask you, Judy, how confident are you that Aaron Rodgers, we don't say 17 games, but plays the majority of the season for the Jets and is healthy? What does your gut say, or prediction, however you'd like to frame it in your mind, that he is able to do that here in 2024?
My gut says yes. Does he play all 17? I don't know. But historically, throughout his career, he played through most injuries, or he would maybe miss a game. But I mean, he played, which is why the Achilles was so stunning, first of all, and just gut-wrenching, because that's it has to be something of that degree to keep him off the field. And you just didn't imagine that happening because he had not suffered a severe injury like that just wiped out the entire season before. So my gut says he will play most of the season. You know, do they give him a week of rest towards the end if they can afford it? Sure. Does he maybe suffer some kind of ding that he needs a week off? Okay. But my gut says that he's going to play throughout the season.
I like your gut, Judy. Like your gut. That sounds spectacular. Well, I just want to tell you, Judy, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
My pleasure being here.
You're a legend. I've read you forever. Watching on television is terrific. I get giddy every time I watch it. I'm just like, that's Judy Battista, baby. So absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show and spending some of your time.
Thank you. Enjoy the season.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Take care.